Shit can get dangerous, yeah. Shit can get dangerous. Shit can get dangerous, yeah. Shit can get dangerous, yeah. You stand with that lame bitch, yeah. Well, I'm stand with the gang bitch, yeah. Like, ooh, and they gon' stay by my side, like, why don't you stay on your side, like, ooh, girl, you always switching sides. Need to get out my life and go get a life, bitch. You just mad you my side, bitch, yeah.
Hey everyone, sorry for the long wait. Today, I present to you all, What if Ichigo was in high school DxD? Please subscribe, like, and comment. No matter who you asked, if they knew Ichigo, they would say that he was an active individual, quiet but active. He didn't like remaining still for long. He had a lot of excess energy and his body demanded that it be used. That is why he was always irritated, why he did so many different sports in high school and why he got into so many fights. There were other reasons of course, but that was the gist of it. He had too much energy due to his unique nature. Now such a person lay defeated, floating aimlessly in a dark void, unmoving. His only company being his sword spirit who had long since entered some state of hibernation to preserve his energy. Zangetsu would wake up once in a while to check on him and then go back to sleep. While he had a lot of spiritual energy, there was no way to replenish his reserves in this empty void. He didn't know exactly how long he had been floating around, but it should have been a few years at the very least. It certainly felt like a few decades. He didn't have much energy left now. He tried his best to hold on after the first few hours of inning, but it didn't matter anymore. He would soon be dead and would hopefully end up wherever his family was. How did he end up in this situation? He didn't know, but after such a long time with only his thoughts, he had come to his own conclusion. He killed Wak, but at the time, Wak was acting as the linchpin connecting the worlds and was forcing them to crash into each other. By the time he defeated Wak, it was too late. The worlds were already crashing into each other. No one could possibly stop such a thing. In his final moments, as he saw the world around him crashing and crumbling and the people simply dissolving into energy, with nothing holding them together, they simply vanished. In the end, Orihime most likely saved him because the last image in his brain was Orihime's crying yet smiling face as she was pointing her hands towards him. From what little he understood, she must have rejected him from the very reality that was crumbling around them. When he first arrived here, he was shocked, so shocked that it took him some time to react. He tried to go back, of course, tried to get Zangetsu to open a Garganta to Echo Mundo, but it didn't work. Then he got angry because everything was pointing towards the fact that his family and friends were dead. He shouted and vented and thrashed around and finally he cried. He cried and kept on crying, calling out to his family and friends, hoping, no, begging that someone else also survived, but to no avail. Soon he had to stop crying because it also wasted his energy. His life was saved by another. He had to live on. He had to make sure that they weren't just forgotten. All of the fights, the struggles, the blood and tears that they had shed, he had to live on because of them. Who knew, maybe he would find someone else who had survived. While the chances of that happening were practically nil, but hope is a strong thing, it kept him from going insane. Even though he had seen the people around him break down into motes of light, he held on to his sense of self and sanity by thinking that someone else might have also survived. Not being able to talk to him after Zangetsu entered his sleep, the only thing Ichigo could do was think about his life and the people that occupied it. He started to realize a few things. One of them being that he had barely lived life for himself after his mother's death. He had lived his life protecting others. Oh, he didn't regret any of it, not one bit, just that the more he lived for others, the more they seemed to be sad. Not that he brought them bad luck or pain or something like that, but the fact that they didn't like him not living his own life. Other was the fact that he had kept most people in his life at arm's length. His school friends didn't really know about his extra activities. When they came to know about it, he still didn't tell them the full extent of it. Those who knew everything, didn't fully know about his inner problems. In the end, when he was starting to move on, leave the past after getting his answers and finally letting people in, this happened. He didn't tell them anything because he thought that the truth will hurt them, but at that point he hadn't yet realized that not telling them was even more painful, for both parties. But there was no point to all of these thoughts now. There's no use thinking about all of this. I have at most an hour before I, myself, start to disintegrate. Ichigo thought with a defeated sigh. As he was getting ready to meet his end, his body was violently jerked. He opened his eyes with a startled expression and finally saw something in what felt like decades. Granted, what he saw was a strange sight, but nonetheless, it was beautiful. Different colored lights were swirling around each other, twisting and turning, expanding and contracting, spontaneously coming into existence and being destroyed just as quickly. It was like a kaleidoscope, but it was as dangerous as it was beautiful. He felt the rate of dissipation of his spiritual energy increase exponentially. What previously felt like an hour of energy was being destroyed, not dissipated or dissolved, but destroyed, and it was being destroyed quickly. Suddenly the feeling of hopelessness in him vanished, and in its place was anger and a fierce will to live. He had made it so far, relatively okay, so he was not going to keel over after finally exiting that void. He was in a new place. He wanted to survive and possibly even thrive in this place. Before he had given up hope of ever leaving that void without dying, but now there was a chance. There was a chance that he could find a new place. He had defied and won against impossible odds before, and he would do it again. No. He had to do it again. If for nothing else but to make a grave for his family and friends. He had such a strong will to live that something connected to him responded. A connection he believed to be temporary and had forgotten about it, a connection that was supposed to be temporary, was once again re-established. Something so powerful and so terrible that every existence feared it, something that represented the ultimate retribution, answered his will to live and gave him just enough energy to survive and enter a new world. Just enough, to leave a permanent mark. Ichigo, on the other hand, didn't feel this connection. So busy he was trying to hold himself together. He just felt that he had crossed a barrier and entered a new place. He exited a crack in space and saw a blue sky with white clouds. He was relieved and the fatigue finally started to catch up. There were different forms of energies floating around him, one of them being spiritual energy. All of it in the surrounding area rushed towards him. To him, who was basically starved of spiritual energy, the sudden rush was too much, and combined with the relief, fatigue and the feeling of triumph from surviving such a near-death experience, he lost his consciousness. He had lost consciousness, but Zangetsu had already awoken due to the sudden extreme changes. He waited for a while for the energy to gather before quickly taking over and stopping Ichigo's free-falling body. Standing still on air, he started to focus on the euphoria that came with once again having excessive energy. He also kept an eye on the surroundings. Such a huge displacement of energy couldn't have gone unnoticed. And well, the sudden thunderstorm in the middle of a hot day was bound to attract attention. The place looked way too habitable for there to not be any native species. He had to make sure that the natives of this world would not harm his king. And indeed, only after a dozen or so minutes, he felt a few energy signals rushing towards him. They were not very fast, but one of them had truly massive amounts of energy inside them. It was similar to Ichigo's around the time he was fighting Aizen. But even if all of that was released in a single attack, to the current him, it would only leave a scratch. Of course, Zangetsu's definition of a scratch was quite different from others. He was a hollow after all, creatures that could reattach cut off limbs, if not regrow them outright, and Ichigo was also getting closer to such a level. As he waited for the party to come to him, the energy swirling around him finally started to calm down. Zangetsu started to stretch and work out any kinks in the body. It was inactive for a long time. It had at most been half an hour since Ichigo fainted, but his body was already in a good enough state to fight. As Zangetsu was stretching, the other party arrived at his location. When he saw who had arrived, Zangetsu was surprised for a second. Ichigo, and by extension, Zangetsu, had seen quite a few strange things and people in their short life. Humans with animal features, animals with human features, humans turning into animals and vice versa, but still, the people that arrived still surprised him. Most of them were humans with animal features, cat ears, dog ears, wolf ears, some of them had heads and wings of a crow. The strongest one had fox ears and 9 tails. As a part of Ichigo, he also knew of the 9-tailed fox that was a legend or myth in their own world. So is this the same legendary fox? Oh, the woman was beautiful and all that, and the vixen also had bigger memories than any other Ichigo had seen, but he didn't care about that. He just wanted to fight that vixen and see how strong she was. He was getting a bit twitchy after coming out. He didn't get many chances to come out and play after all. The other party was also getting ready. It seems that him wanting to fight had shown on his face, but Zangetsu stopped and thought. Should he fight? He really wanted to, but his first priority was Ichigo's safety. This group wouldn't be able to hurt him, but what about others? They didn't know anything or anyone in this world, so they shouldn't go around making enemies. That sounded right, and not to mention how irritating Ichigo would get when he woke up and found himself in the middle of a fight. He wouldn't let him come out to play at all. With extreme reluctance, Zangetsu put the sword on his back and showed the other party his empty hands. They approached him with caution after a bit of back and forth amongst themselves. The fox lady was in the front and asked him a question with a frown. Who are you and what are you doing on our land? He had a feeling that she meant my land rather than our land. Some sort of royalty, Zangetsu decided. He wanted to reply with none of your business, but he had a feeling that it would lead to a fight. While he wanted to fight, Ichigo needed a place to rest and decompress. So, once again visibly restraining himself, he answered. A straggler. He didn't know what he should say and what he shouldn't, so he decided to not care about it. Ichigo could deal with that himself. The people in front of him were surprised after hearing his voice. The animal people. Or rather, now that he was not thinking about fighting, the ones with crow's head and wings, their appearance was similar to the Karasutengu from the midst of their world and combined with the 9-tailed fox. He was talking to freaking UKIs, not only that but UKIs told in Japanese myths. He had a hard time holding back his laugh at such a strange development. The Kyuubi seemed to notice his amusement and asked with a frown. And why is a straggler like you on our lands? Not by choice, I'll tell ya. We just ended up here after that colorful shit. Zangetsu replied with a sneer. He wasn't sneering at the UKIs, but at how close Ichigo had come to dying. The yokai didn't know about his thoughts and thought that he was sneering at them, so they got angry. As the minions were readying their weapons with anger, the Kyuubi stopped them and asked a question that once again surprised him. You are not the owner of that body, are you? I will ask you once again, spirit. Who are you, why are you here, and why have you possessed that young man's body? While the one standing in front of them seemed human, the feeling was completely unnatural, not to mention the voice and the eyes. UKIs were beings close to nature, especially the Kyuubi, since it was connected to the land they were standing on. The UKIs once again started to prepare for a fight and quickly surrounded Zangetsu. He liked them because he was surprised at how quickly she came to that judgment. He was a part of Ichigo, a part that was with Ichigo even before his birth. To those who didn't know Ichigo personally or were meeting him for the first time, it shouldn't have been easy for them to distinguish between the two of them. But it took the lady only a few minutes after meeting him to come to that conclusion. He was intrigued. Why do you say so? Zangetsu asked with even more amusement. He didn't want to start a fight, but if they started it, he was allowed to defend himself and his king, right? He still didn't pull out the sword though and kept smiling at them, urging them to make the first move. Just as they were going to move in, Zangetsu clicked his tongue and said with great dissatisfaction. Now you wake up. He clicked his tongue again before his shoulders slumped. The atmosphere around him completely changed. If before, he was a predator ready to pounce, now he was a hunter cautiously surveying his surroundings. The feeling of danger was still there, but the bloodthirst suddenly vanished. The UKIs were also able to sense the change and looked towards their leader. After taking a deep breath, the Kyuubi asked the same question for the third time. Who are you and why are you here? Ichigo felt a bit lost, but Zangetsu explained the situation roughly. The ones in front of him were very similar to UKIs of the legends. He was the sudden uninvited guest on the lands of these creatures, and the QB seemed to their leader and royalty of some sort. Ichigo decided to trust Zangetsu feeling, and after thinking for a while, answered truthfully with a shrug. I haven't a single clue on how I got here. It took Ichigo about a week to accept that he was in a completely new world, and that he was already in debt to someone he had barely come to know for that week. The entire week went by in a haze of new knowledge. All he did was learn about this new world and the people in it. The yokai had thankfully left him alone, besides the dozen or so distant observers, that is. He barely ate or slept and only did those activities due to habit. Besides that, all his time was used for observing and studying about this new place and people he had found himself entangled with. First, he found out that he was surprisingly in Japan, amidst UKIs, the same ones in the Japanese mythology of his world. Most, if not all, of the other countries were also the same as in his own world. The cities were also the same, not similar, but same. There were of course changes, but the major cities were the exact same. The recent history was also the same. The Warring State period, the Edo period, the Meiji, the Showa, were the same. The two world wars also happened, but the nukes weren't dropped. Before the Warring States period though, the history was strange. It was basically incomplete. Or it felt like the historians had constantly changed a lot of it. He had asked his observers the reason for such gaps and was told that a great war between the three factions of Bible was occurring during that time, which slowly, over the course of more than 1,000 years, had included nearly every single faction or pantheon in the world, besides a few that remained isolated. The Great War had started with the angels, the devils and the fallen angels, Grigori, fighting each other. The Grigori, having the least amount of fighters, decided to recruit and ally with the factions and pantheons outside of their circle. This led to the other two also trying to find new allies, which in turn, led to old grudges coming to light and new ones to form. Due to this, the war, which should have been short-lived and limited to the biblical faction, was spread all over the world, and no supernatural faction was spared of its ugliness. In the end, over the course of 1,000+ years, it led to the death of hundreds of billions of creatures all over the world, supernatural and mundane. It was one of the reasons all the other factions were leery of the biblical faction and anyone associated with them. The Great War had to be stopped, and in the end, when it was finally stopped, no one was declared the winner. Everyone lost, especially those that wanted to gain something by allying themselves with one of the three biblical factions. After the Great War ended, it didn't take even a few centuries for the devils to enter a civil war, but this time, no one else joined any sides in the civil war between the devils remained between the devils. That civil war ended around the time the Warring States period in Japan started, during which all the supernatural factions had gone into hiding, away from the mundanes, to focus on healing and recovering from the devastation. Due to this, the history that the mundanes wrote was clear after that time, but completely messed up before that. It was same all over the world. That was also around the time that the mundanes slowly started to move away from religion and superstitions, towards science and logic. They, the supernaturals, didn't mess with the history. The mundanes simply didn't want to believe in the real one and created their own messed up history with gaps and strange events. After hearing all of this and reading everything himself, did Ichigo finally start to understand that he was in a completely different world that only looked the same on the surface. But that wasn't all. He learned that all the other mythologies that he had read in his own world were also real in this one. Takamagata was real and the Shinto gods lived there. Greek gods were real, Norse gods were real, the Chinese gods were real, all the gods in Hinduism were real. The more he read and heard about this world, the stranger it got. How was the world created if all the creation gods were real? Because he didn't believe for a second that these creation gods wouldn't fight each other for the right of creation. The more he read, the more confused he got, so he stopped reading. It didn't matter to him how this world was created, just that he was now in it. He started to read more about the factions and pantheons that existed so he could figure out what he was supposed to do in this world. The Hindu pantheon was unanimously believed to be the strongest due to the sheer number of gods they had and the fact that their strongest, Shiva, was the fourth and sometimes third strongest creature in the entire world, right below the two dragon gods that were said to be unbeatable and the god in Bible. After that, many still believe the biblical faction to be the second in strength, but only if the three factions could combine their powers. Since they were still divided, it was debatable. After that, it got more confusing as the factions kept on bickering on who was stronger and the positions kept changing. He also learned that many factions had been destroyed completely during the Great War. Many, if not all, of the Irish gods were dead and the pantheon no longer existed. If any remained, they had been in hiding for long enough to be forgotten. The Aztecs were annihilated and only a few ruins of their existence still remained. Most of the African deities were dead. The Mayan pantheon, Slavic pantheon and the Inca pantheon were also considered dead because no one knew how many of them survived and because no one had seen nor even heard rumors about their continued existence. After that, he learned about the top 10, the 10 strongest creatures in this world. The first was the Dragon of Dreams, Great Red. Second was the Dragon of Infinity, Office. Third was either the Hindu god of destruction, Shiva, or the god of Bible, Yahweh, Wakwayuhabak. When he first heard that name, he went nearly crazy with anger, thinking that he was seeing one he loathed. The pressure he released was strong enough to flatten the entirety of Kyoto, but the leader of the yokai, Yasaka, came and stopped him. He thanked her, asked her how long this Yahweh had been in this world for, and was told that he had been here for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. That managed to calm him down. It might have been the case of having similar name, like so many other things in this world, but he would remain vigilant. The other 6, of the top 10, kept going up and down with few remaining there for more than a decade. The evil dragon, Kromkruk. The current Lucifer, Sirskis. The Lord of the Dead, Hades. The Allfather, Odin, were few that had constantly remained in the top 10 for the last few centuries. Thinking about it now, his reaction to the name was definitely a bit too much. He knew that the pressure he released passively was strong enough to kill a normal person if they got close to him, not to mention if he actively released his spiritual pressure. If Yasaka hadn't gotten to him so fast, some of the UKIs would definitely have died. It was likely that any humans in this side of Kyoto already had died after that few seconds. Lastly, he focused on the people around him at the moment, the UKIs. They were a strange bunch. Many of them, he knew through Japanese folklore and stories. They were different from the stories he had heard though, in a sense that they were more mellow. They were divided into 2 factions, East and West. Yasaka was the leader of the West Yokai faction and Nurari Hyun was the leader of East Yokai faction. Shuden Doji was apparently the leader of the tribe of Oni and was well liked and respected. Similar to him, many of the others that were part of horror stories back in his world, were well liked and respected. The leaders of both factions were allies and had remained non-aggressive against each other for centuries now. There wasn't much difference between the two, other than that the more human-looking were in Kyoto and the more bizarre-looking were in Kanto, where the East Yokai faction was established. Yasaka was a 9-tailed fox that were held as signs of good omen and were known as guardians of temples in his world. Here, she was loved and revered by nearly every yokai. She was not only a great leader but also a powerful one. He also asked her about the different power levels in this world. It was divided quite clearly. Lowest were the normal humans. Then the low-level beings, then mid-level and then high-level. Most stopped at this point, unable to get any stronger. In an army, the high levels would be the elite. After that came the ultimate class. It was divided into 3 tiers basically. Lower, middle, and upper. These were the head of clans and even leaders of some smaller factions in case of upper ultimate. Yasaka, using her full powers, including the power of the land itself, could reach the upper ultimate class. It was like 2 voices overlapped, one being the original and the other. Oh. The answer was slow to come, but it came. As the stare down was going on between them, she concentrated and felt another, stronger ego inside the being in front of her. She had the strongest connection to nature, especially on her land, and she felt the inner ego to be the natural one. Now that she understood the unnational thing about the one in front of them, she readied her transformation and asked for her lady's help before confronting the being. You are not the owner of that body, are you? I will ask you once again, spirit. Who are you, why are you here, and why have you possessed that young man's body? Instead of being angry or trying to deny her, it seemed amused and stayed still as her people surrounded it and readied their sealing talismans. It eagerly asked why she thought so and waited for them to make the first move. Just as she was ready to give the signal, the being clicked his tongue and muttered, "Now you wake up." Before clicking his tongue again and going limp, she felt the other stronger and natural ego take over. The eyes also turned to look human. In the place of a hungry predator now stood a vigilant hunter. She asked the same question for a third time, letting none of the annoyance she felt into her voice, and the answer she got only increased her annoyance. She asked for her lady's guidance once more and was told to receive the stranger as a guest and to treat them carefully. She was still a bit annoyed, so she didn't even question the advice and invited the person to her castle. As they were going to her castle, she asked the young man questions about himself and what could have possibly led to him landing in her territory with what she felt was a forced teleportation or an experiment gone wrong, same thing basically. The young man introduced himself as Ichigo Kurosaki, and the tale that followed the introduction was as fascinating as it was terrifying. A whole world destroyed by a single being, with only him as the lone survivor. A being that could do such a thing was on the level of Great Red and Office. Not only that, the young man following her, who had not only killed such a foe but also survived the destruction of a world, was even more scary. He didn't mention any names or what kind of being he was, but now that they were away from the center of the spiritual storm, she could feel the power of death wafting around Ichigo. He had to be some kind of elder death god, that was the only conclusion she could come up with. It also explained her lady's instructions to treat the young-looking man as a guest and their careful treatment. The annoyance suddenly became a headache. Just as she was thinking about hard times coming upon them, a calamity crashed into her lands. She just hoped that this calamity didn't destroy them completely, because she was already sure that a lot of things would be destroyed. As they neared her castle, a thought suddenly came to her mind with all the subtlety of a battering ram, and she sighed. Canoe. Yasaka didn't take long to find a large and open place for him to create a grave. He was led to an open space in the middle of a forest. In that opening was a large boulder. The moment he saw the boulder, he understood why he was brought here. He moved forward and cut the boulder in half, creating a clean surface on one side of it. There weren't any bodies, so he slowly started to carve out the names of his family and friends on the boulder. Every name he wrote was filled with memories and emotions. Memories that he was determined to carve into his own brain. His tears didn't stop even once in those few days. It was painful, much, much more painful than he thought. Starting with the most painful. Yuzu, Karen, his father, Arihime, Chad, Mizuhiro, Keigo, Tatsuki, Rukia, Renji, Ryu, Kiseki, Yoruichi, Nell, Hinataro, all the captains, the vice captains, the hollows, even the full-bringers. He didn't exclude anyone. Anyone he had any memories with, good or bad, big or small, he wrote their name. Even when writing names like Ulquiorra, Grimjow, Ginjo or Kurotsuchi, names like these that didn't exactly bring forth good memories, but he didn't stop carving. Then came the acquaintances, some teachers whose names he remembered, some shopkeeper whose name he suddenly recalled, some other people whose name he started to remember. He kept moving, without eating or resting for an entire week before finally stopping and moving back. He wasn't tired, at least not physically, but mentally and emotionally he was completely exhausted. He was drained but felt much lighter. He seemed to have shed a heavy weight. He moved further back and looked at what he had created. His writing wasn't neat in the first place. Furthermore, he wasn't writing on a piece of paper with a pen but on a giant rock with his sword. An entire week spent on writing and there were still less than 100 names on the stone. He sat down and looked at the surroundings. Yasaka had led him to this place personally, knowing what he wanted to do. As he looked at the peaceful scenery, he felt calm and his exhaustion started to catch up. He said one final thing before finally succumbing to sleep. I'm sorry, but goodbye. He slept for a while before opening his eyes in his inner world. He looked around and saw a lot of changes in the place. The skyscrapers were still here, the sky and clouds were also here, but everything was finally right side up and nothing was submerged in water like it usually was whenever he was sad. He was standing on a road that led to a park he had never seen in here. He moved towards it slowly, looking around. He could feel Zangetsu and another strange power in one direction, but decided to go there after the park. If it was important, Zangetsu would have already called him. He entered the park and found himself standing in front of the same memorial he had created outside. He looked at it for a while, but no more tears came out. Soon he felt Zangetsu getting impatient and moved towards his direction. As he turned his back to the stone, he released a sigh and started to walk away. He would never forget them, the ones that had died too early, the ones he wanted to spend his life surrounded by, the ones he wanted to see grow up. He would never forget them. At the same time, what would they think if he stopped moving forward? What would they think if they saw him crying because of them? Because he would never forget them, that was also the reason why he couldn't just stop and keep crying, and why he would continue to move forward. Hey, as old man Zangetsu said, retreat and you will age. Hesitate and you will die. Not exactly a fitting thought, but with it, he felt even lighter. Ichigo didn't know it yet, but with his change in mentality, his powers had completely merged with him. His eyes, normally a soft brown, had changed into a warm golden color. His speed increased and soon he was standing in front of a lake. A lake that was not here, in his inner world before. In the middle of the lake was an island, another new thing. He quickly made his way to the island and saw Zangetsu standing in front of a gate. A familiar looking gate. It took him a few seconds to remember where he had seen it. The moment he remembered, his jaw dropped and he shouted. What the fuck is a hell gate doing inside me? The gate in front of him was much smaller than the one he had seen. The original was at least a few dozen meters tall, this one was much smaller than the one that appeared over Karakura town, at around 3 meters. But it was an exact replica. Same skeletons embedded into the door, having the same ceiling tags. Though the answer he got to his shout wasn't exactly reassuring. How the fuck should I know? Zangetsu replied with the same vigor. Since when? Probably since we came here. Zangetsu answered with a shrug. Probably? And why didn't you tell me when you first found it? Ichigo asked irritatedly. Ha! Like you were in any shape to handle another shock, Ichigo. And probably because we weren't in any shape to sense it if it appeared before that. Zangetsu replied with his cocky smirk. Ichigo could guess why Zangetsu was smirking. Hell was a place that empowered his hollow powers after all. Zangetsu certainly had fun rampaging around in there. Ichigo pinched his brows. The good feelings he had only gotten started diminishing. This would most likely be a cause of great headache sooner or later. He was leaning towards sooner than later. How long do you think before this becomes a pain in the ass? Ichigo asked Zangetsu with a fed-up expression. A month at most, give or take a week. Zangetsu answered confidently. Humph, at least give it a year, damn it. Ichigo replied heatedly, before sighing. Zangetsu's laughter wasn't helping. Why does this keep happening to me? Ichigo asked no one. Though he still got an amused answer from Zangetsu. Because you are fate's bitch, Ichigo, accept it. Not helping you, Sonova. Ichigo got ready for a fight. Wasn't trying to, bitch. Zangetsu happily obliged. Soon they were both fighting each other. For Ichigo, fighting helped him center himself and get rid of frustration. For Zangetsu, it was simply fun. It was also a way for him to connect with Zangetsu more deeply and in turn understand himself. He hadn't exactly done this before. Well, he had fought Zangetsu before, but without knowing who he was fighting. Every time he fought Zangetsu, there was something else going on outside, so he didn't have any time to connect with his Zanpakuto, like many other Shinigami did. Since he had decided to keep moving forward, this was a necessary step in that direction. Finally, this was a way for them to understand the changes that had happened to them. Before entering the final battle, his Zanpakuto had gone through multiple successive changes with little time in between each change. Now that he was well rested and had shed the weight, he was able to experiment with his powers. It didn't take long into the fight for Ichigo to realize that he was different. He felt more complete, in a sense. It was a feeling he didn't know he lacked. As soon as he realized it, Zangetsu started to fire Ceros at him, laughing out loud. Since when can you just lob them around? You can too, you idiot. Don't you feel it, Ichigo? That's you at your full power. Ha ha ha. Ichigo had felt it too. He was overflowing with power and yet all of that power listened to him obediently. He also felt a lot of it locked away, just waiting to be released. Now that he was fighting again, he felt amazing. The more he fought, the more free he felt. This wasn't the first time he had felt such an exhilarating rush during a fight, but the fact that he was in no mortal danger and there was no one who would die if he didn't step forward helped a lot. Maybe he was being selfish, but after making the decision to keep moving forward, he kept feeling better and a fight with no danger or consequences helped him even more. Soon he also started to throw around Ceros and trying new ways to use them. He had already combined one with Getsuga Tensou, but what if he let it sit, would it explode on contact? He kept trying new things and realized that Ceros were a lot more convenient than Getsuga. He could fire them from his hands. If he wanted a bigger one, he could fire it from his sword. If he wanted a smaller one, he could fire it from his fingers. From his fist, the back of his hands, his feet. There were too many ways to use them with varying degree of lethality. The one from his hand was wider and concussive in nature. The from his fist was narrower and bludgeoning in nature. The ones from his fingers were more penetrative. The ones from his feet tended to lash out like a whip, and the one from his sword was the most destructive in nature as it disintegrated whatever it touched. Of course there would always be someone who could take them all without a scratch. So during a lull in the fight, he asked Zangetsu. Zangetsu, the remaining that is sealed, how do I use it? He was talking about the remaining power that was still sealed in him. Zangetsu stopped after hearing his question, and answered. Ichigo, when Wak first broke Tensei Zangetsu, he took your Hollow and Quincy powers, leaving only your Shinigami powers. The only reason I survived was because I am your Hollow and Shinigami powers personified. You don't see the old man around here anywhere, do you? He died with Wak. Zangetsu stopped, letting him digest what he just heard. He nodded Zangetsu to continue after a while. What was one more in the list of dead and gone? A callous thought, but he couldn't help it. Since you were born a Hollow in Quincy as well, those powers started coming back as soon as Wak was dead. During the final blow, Tensei Zangetsu transformed into Zangetsu without you releasing your Bankai. Currently, you are always in your released state. Zangetsu stopped once again. He motioned him to keep going. The last of your powers are sealed by that gate, as that thing is an outside entity. I don't know how to access the sealed parts. Zangetsu ended it with a shrug. Ichigo groaned and started massaging his forehead. The gate was already being a pain in the ass and it hadn't even been a day since its discovery. Let's stop here for now. We will slowly try to figure this out as we go, Ichigo said. Suddenly though, he had a thought. Zangetsu. During that kaleidoscopic trip, we were barely running on fumes. We shouldn't have survived no matter what we did. Do you think this thing, hell, helped us survive? Zangetsu just shrugged, saying he didn't have a clue. If that was true, then there must have been a reason for that help. Even last time, the only reason hell helped him was to keep Kokuto, a sinner kept at the bottommost level of hell, from escaping. That time, there wasn't a price because he achieved the goal he was given, but what about this time? What was the goal he had to achieve? Was the sealed part of his powers the price for that help? He didn't know, and it didn't feel good knowing that an outside entity had such influence over him. He groaned again, thinking about why such things keep happening to him, and started to leave his inner world. As he was leaving, he heard Zangetsu's laughing voice. Fate's bitch. He could only sigh after hearing that. Waking up, He found himself still in the clearing. He looked at the monument one last time, smiled and said, "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine here." With that, he moved away without looking back. Once he was back at the palace, he went to look for Yasaka and was quickly led to her. She was currently on a break with her daughter. As he was approaching her, she looked at him with a somewhat surprised expression but quickly controlled it and smiled. He was still struck speechless whenever he saw it. Usually she would send her daughter away whenever he was near and he thought she was scared that he would harm her, which was a valid concern but that didn't mean he liked worrying others. This time though she didn't. She started talking with a smile. "Ichigo Dono, you seem to have calmed down." "Calmed down?" Ichigo asked, a bit confused. "Yes. Ever since you arrived, the pressure around you had been suffocating except for me and my elite. But now, the suffocating feeling has vanished. If before his aura had been like a dragon looking directly at you, ready to pounce, now it was like a sleeping dragon. Still scary, but not enough to give heart attacks." "Is that why you sent your daughter away whenever I was near?" "Yes. The aura of death lingering around you was enough to kill the weaker yokai, including my daughter, if they got close enough," she replied awryly. The daughter was still sitting in her mother's lap and looking at him with curiosity. She was a cute little thing. She had golden hair and eyes like her mother, but she had darker hair and lighter eyes, whilst her mother was the opposite, and she was wearing a Miko outfit. Her fox ears and tails were waving and twitching around as she looked at him. He knew her name and decided to introduce himself. He said with a small smile, "Hello Kanu, my name is Ichigo Kurosaki and I am a Shinigami." This was the first time he had told them what he was. He had shared what had happened to him and who he was, but not what he was. Though he had a feeling that Yasaka already knew that. He looked at her and saw that she wasn't surprised, so she had probably figured it out somehow. While he was thinking that, Kanu suddenly gasped and held on to her mother tightly. She asked him with a trembling voice, Are you here to take my mother away?" He looked at her, barely holding back a smile and shook his head. "No, I'm not here to take your mother away. Your mother helped me when I was hurt." With that said, he slightly bowed his head. He wasn't used to saying thank you, let alone bow his head, but he also knew that the help he received from Yasaka was vital for him. He didn't know if she had any ulterior motives behind helping him, rather he was pretty sure that she had, but the fact remained that she helped him and that he was thankful for that help. And so, he bowed his head for a few seconds and said, "Thank you, for your help Yasaka. I was able to do something I really wanted to without any problems." Saying that, he looked back at her and continued, "I will still need more help and I don't have anything to pay you back with." He kept looking at her. She appeared slightly flustered and her ears and tails were starting to twitch, showing her agitation. Yasaka had done her best to help him due to the instructions of Lady Amaterasu. So she was flustered when faced with such sincere gratitude. Ichigo noticed it and kept going. "I don't care why you did what you did, but I won't deny how much it helped me. I am not good at anything except fighting, so if you need anything related to that, don't hesitate to ask for my help." Ichigo said it with such sincerity and intensity that it caused Yasaka to flush. Seeing how serious he looked, this felt more like he was swearing an oath than wanting to return in a favor. Yasaka knew that such a thing from a being like Ichigo would be immensely helpful, in many situations. She could use such a favor in many ways, but most importantly to her was the wording. He was thanking her, not the UKIs but her, meaning he took it as a personal favor from her and was willing to return it as such. Maybe Lady Amaterasu already knew it would lead to this. Whatever it was, it would definitely prove to be helpful. She sighed softly and got herself under control, before deciding that being truthful would be the best course of action. From what she had observed, Ichigo would not take it too badly. "I helped you because Lady Amaterasu asked me to do so. I don't know what my lady's goals are, but I assure you that she is known as the most benevolent deity to exist and it isn't without reason that she is known as that." Seeing Yasaka all flustered and try to explain her and her leader's reasoning for helping him was surprisingly cute. Before this, he had seen her as a mature woman, filled with charisma, and while it felt bad even thinking about it, very sexy. Right now though, she looked downright cute, and with a chibi version of her sitting in her lap looking all confused, the overall cuteness was overwhelming. Enough to make him snort in laughter. Though he controlled his laughter immediately, it was enough to bring Yasaka to a sudden stop. With her mouth open and an indignant expression on her face, she asked him, "Why are you laughing?" Yasaka was angry. Here she was worrying about him being angry and possibly even taking out his anger on her and her people, and this man had the nerve to laugh. As she got more and more annoyed and irritated with him, he finally lost it and started to laugh out loud. It was a stupid thing to laugh at, but he couldn't help it. He decided that these people weren't all that bad and that being a bit more open with them wouldn't hurt him. So, he told Yasaka and Kanu about himself and his life. He couldn't find anything in himself that told him that this was a bad idea. With that, he actually took the first step to integrate himself in this new world and started to form new bonds. His talks with Yasaka and her daughter kept increasing in frequency. He told them about his family, his mother, his father, and especially his sisters. Talking about them still brought a pang of pain in his heart, and it probably won't be stopping anytime soon, but, nonetheless, he told them about his life and the friends he made along the way. The fights he had to go through and the reason for those fights. In turn, Yasaka told him about herself and her people. She talked about how she got the position of the leader, the challenges she faced to get to that position, and what she had to deal with after she became the leader. It all sounded like a lot of work. You must know, Ichigo Dono, that in this world, personal power is a very important factor. The reason many have what they have is mostly due to their personal power and their connection to other powerful beings. These two factors can either make or break a person's entire life. Yasaka told him during one of their talks. Is there no, I don't know, a central police force of some kind that controls these people? If there wasn't, how is this world still existing? Yasaka shook her head and answered. Every faction has its own police force, as you said, but they usually only control their own faction. Anything that happens outside their territories is inconsequential to them. For example, we, the West Yokai faction, focus on Kyoto and the surrounding areas. The East focuses on Kanto and the surrounding areas, while Japan as a whole is under the jurisdiction of the Shinto gods. Though there have been attempts to create a central system that watches over all the factions, all of them, however, have ended in failure. The main reason being that the ones who attempted had ulterior motives. After that, their talks usually centered around the current happenings in the world. Ichigo found these talks very intriguing and was usually the one to start the conversation, which was very rare for him to do. Kanu, on the other hand, led him around the palace, introducing him to the different places inside it. She also introduced him to her personal guards and proudly told him how many times she had managed to slip under their noses. The guards themselves seemed pretty embarrassed and also proud at the same time. Embarrassed that a child managed, and still continued, to slip past them, and proud because it was their little princess doing it. She would come to his room after, more often during, her studies and drag him outside the palace to have fun. He could say no, but how do you say no to a cute little thing like her? The fact that she could make this miserable face, complete with teary eyes and droopy ears and sagging tails, was just unfair. He certainly felt that all of it brought them closer. Yasaka had finally dropped the dono after days of insisting and started calling him Ichigo. Kanu, though, immediately started calling him Ichigo the moment he said to drop any honorifics. It felt right. He was never one for formalities and would probably dislike them for as long as he lived. On the topic of living though, he soon realized that he had a long fucking time to go before his natural death. He knew that this Hinigami back in his world could live for millennia and that he had not even lived for a century. It was a fact that shocked Yasaka when she first heard it. His young age combined with his immense powers was a very rare occurrence. Currently, the strongest in this world were all at least a few centuries old, and no one knew the age of the oldest ones. She herself had lived for centuries, and that had for some reason depressed her. The moment he saw her teary eyes, he tried to cheer her up by saying that he was an anomaly, a freak of nature, a strange hybrid and other such things, and that she shouldn't compare herself to him. He started talking about all the shinigami back in his world that couldn't really amount to anything even after centuries of living. Just when he was about to actually panic, she started laughing. It began with a giggle and soon turned into laughter. He realized that he had been had. Just like how he laughed at her panicking days ago, she did the same. He couldn't do anything but shake his head and let her get it out of her system. This also let him know that Yasaka could be quite mischievous if she wanted to. After that episode, he had been given the honor of accompanying her during her daily meetings with the people that came to her court. He realized that while she had advisors and ministers, she was still the ruler of the land and was seen as the sole empress. Since she was also a priestess of the goddess of sun and mother of Japan, Amaterasu, her position was even more solid. Most of the simpler cases were handled by her officials, but cases that involved murder and anything of that degree had to be brought to her notice. During the week he accompanied her, there were 3 cases of murder, out of which one turned out to be a suicide. The other 2, though, were ruled to be hate crimes, and the perpetrators were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to a lifetime of jail. He learned during the sentencing part that he enjoyed it. Catching criminals and giving them their just due, there was something satisfying about that. Something inside him felt invigorated, and it didn't take him long to find out what part of him that was. When the criminals were sentenced, something inside him stirred, and during the second time, Zanjutsu told him that it was the Hell Gate. When the sinners got their punishment, the gate vibrated, as if to show approval. He got the first clue about what Hell wanted from him. Hell wanted him to find sinners and punish them. He could get behind that actually. Not only was that a good thing, he would also have something to do besides sit around all day and accompany the mother-daughter duo. He wasn't saying that he didn't like being with them, but that he would actually like to do something and not just leech off of them. So the next day, he brought it up with Yasaka. He still hadn't told her about the Hell Gate inside him, but he did tell her that he was feeling a bit useless just following them around and not doing anything. When he told her that, she looked a bit relieved. He frowned and asked her what was wrong. What happened? He didn't receive an answer even after waiting for a few minutes. So he looked towards her and found her fidgeting in her seat. Any other time, he would have found a woman like Yasaka fidgeting, very cute. Right now though, he had no choice but to ask again. Yasaka. What happened? It was a bit more forceful than he wanted, but if there was a problem related to him, he wanted to know. Yasaka sighed as if giving up and answered him. Many of the officials are worrying about you being a freeloader and a ticking time bomb. His frown got deeper, but he could see where they were coming from. He had been here for nearly a month now and all he had done was live off of Yasaka's generosity. That's why he was starting to feel a bit self-conscious as well. He wanted to do something to repay her, and if that was not possible, at least move away to live on his own and earn his own money. While he had come to consider Yasaka a friend and Kanu, the mischievous daughter of said friend, he didn't want to become a burden on them. He got rid of his frown and nodded. Yasaka, do you consider me a friend? His question startled her out of her reverie, but she still answered him with a pout. Whatever it was cute. Of course. Do you not see us as such? He shook his head, both to deny that and to clear his head of unnecessary thoughts. I do. That's why I would have liked if you just told me about such things. I've been thinking of leaving here for some time now, but I didn't know how to bring it up. Here he hesitated for a while. What he was going to say next was a bit out there if he was being perfectly honest. He wanted to ask if she or any of her people had the means to create an identity for him in the human world. While in the supernatural world, things like ID card, birth certificate, address, records of education and things like that were basically unnecessary, that wasn't true for the human world. Yasaka, seeing him hesitate, shook her head and said, Ichigo, did you not just tell me that if I considered you a friend, I should simply tell you what I had on my mind? She stopped and Ichigo nodded. Then why are you not doing the same? She asked with exasperation. Ichigo looked a bit sheepish before clearing his throat and just said what he wanted. Yasaka shook her head again before she said. Ichigo, you might not believe it, but we have hundreds, if not thousands, of such identities available. We constantly use them to check on the outside world as well as spy on any other faction that enters Japan without the permission of the Shinto gods. I have a minister solely in charge of these identities, and he has to make sure that no one else knows that behind these fake identities are my people, basically a spy master. Ichigo was a bit shocked when he heard that. But it seemed Yasaka wasn't done. Not only us, but every other faction is most certainly to have such things in place as well. During the last century alone, the sudden and extreme increase in the number of humans allowed us to place entire families filled with fake identities without any suspicion. Yasaka kept shaking her head like she couldn't believe he had said something so stupid. He was starting to feel a bit embarrassed now. So, it's possible then? Ichigo asked, clearing his throat. Yes, it is. But before that, Ichigo, aren't you forgetting something? Yasaka asked him with a raised brow. Ichigo thought about it for a while before shaking his head. Yasaka looked at him pointedly for a moment before saying. The fact that you are a spiritual entity? Right. It was only then he remembered that his body was also destroyed with his world. Right now he was, as Yasaka pointed out, a spiritual entity. No matter how high his spiritual energy was, he would still be invisible to most humans. That shot down his idea to try and mingle with the humans in this world. As he was lamenting about his life again, Yasaka started talking. I can guess your thoughts, Ichigo, but what I want to know is why you even want to get closer to the humans. You are no longer a human, Ichigo. Not only that, but the pressure you exude passively is enough to render most normal humans catatonic, if not outright killing them. She stopped here, looking at his reaction. Seeing and feeling no anger, she continued. While I understand that you may still have a human mentality, Ichigo, it would be best for you to get rid of it. It will only cause you pain as you easily outlive any of your new human friends. Ichigo let out a deep sigh and smiled sardonically. He already knew all of that, of course. He just wasn't thinking for a moment. What would he even do after going to the human world? Pursue higher studies? Get a job? Start a business? He couldn't do any of those. He didn't really want to study anymore, and he didn't exactly have the skills to do the other things he listed. What he wanted though was some resemblance to the old life he lived. It was a strange thought, but that's exactly what he wanted. Something that would keep reminding him of those he lost. His sardonic smile turned into a sad one. Yasaka once again seemed to know what he was thinking and said after some hesitation. Ichigo. What you went through is not something that can be overcome in a month. Give yourself some time. Mourn for them. Sit around, do whatever you want. Just don't be in a hurry. I don't want to joke about it, but you have a lot of time on your hands. Ichigo remained quiet for a while before asking. What do you think I should do? In my exalted opinion, you should travel. Go around the world, meet new people, find something you like to do and do it. Find people you like and surround yourself with them. It won't get rid of the pain, but it will lessen it. Yasaka said all of that with a hand on her chest and her nose turned high. It was something that Kanu did once in a while, and it was adorable no matter who did it. He knew she was doing it to lighten his mood, and it did help. He smiled and decided to play along. Understood, Yasaka-hime. I shall listen to your elevated judgment and make myself scarce. This sort of interaction between them was becoming more common. He liked it. He liked Yasaka and Kanu and the few others that weren't scared to talk to him. Kanu's guards and some of the palace maids mostly. Yasaka deflated, but before she could say anything, he continued. But I've already found some people I like, and it certainly helps being around them. Yasaka looked at him for a while and a sultry smile appeared on her face. Ichigo-kun. If I didn't hear that wrong, I believe you just said you liked me. The way she looked right now, with a sultry smile, a finger on her lip, slightly bending forward with her bare shoulders and open kimono, it was one of the sexiest sight he had seen in his life. He couldn't help but look down for a second before he controlled himself. Seeing Yasaka like this flustered him, but he had also come to know that she was this way with anyone she trusted, so it felt nice, in different ways. He cleared his throat and averted his eyes before he did something more than just look, but he still decided to play along. That is exactly what I meant. That caused Yasaka to laugh. Her laughter wasn't loud. She maintained her noble appearance even when she laughed, and he didn't want to be rude, but it did interesting things to her chest. Ichigo, you are far too young to play this game with me, she said haughtily. She said that with her chest thrust out, and while he was proud of his self-control, he still had limited amounts of it, so he tried to change the topic. As I was saying, I am with people I like, but I still have to find something I want to do. I told you before that I would like to go out there and catch criminals, so any suggestions? Ichigo asked hurriedly. Yasaka smiled at him before thinking. The room was filled with silence, but it didn't feel awkward at all, it felt nice. After an hour or so of working on her paperwork, Yasaka said, I think it would be best for you to become a bounty hunter. Not only will it help you catch criminals, but you will also be paid to do it. The icing on the cake is that you can pick and choose who you want to catch. They lapsed into another silence. He liked that idea. Besides what she just said, he could also help her by catching criminals she wanted to be caught. If she wanted, he could become a hunter solely associated with her faction, but that a thought for later. The more he thought about it, the more he liked it. He nodded and said, I like it. If you have any criminals you want to be caught, I could start with them. Being a bounty hunter would require skills and patience. Skills that he did not currently have, but he could learn them. As Yasaka had said before, he had a lot of time to do things he wanted to do. He would slowly get better at it, catch some criminals and get some answers. Having a goal, something to strive for, was in his opinion another step in moving on. For that, I will introduce you to our spy master. He is a strange person but is very highly regarded by all yokai. Not only the yokai in Japan but yokai all over Asia respect him, myself included. Is he powerful or something? He is indeed powerful, at around mid-ultimate, just a level below me. But the main reason he is so highly regarded is because he is old. He is acknowledged as the oldest living yokai in the world. He is a tortoise yokai, known to be the longest living species besides gods. Many believe him to be older than 100,000 years, but no one actually knows his real age or his real name or his origins. He is simply known as Elder General. Ichigo was intrigued. If anyone knew the actual history before the Great War, it would be this elder. When can I meet him? Oh, he comes and goes as he pleases. He usually checks in on me once every decade or so, and it has already been more than a decade, so he should already be in Japan. You will have to wait for some time though. He might show up tomorrow, but it also might take him a year. Ichigo wanted to retort that a year was too long, but then he realized that it really wasn't. He was still thinking like a human. He sighed and said, What should I do until then? Yasaka shook her head, seeing him agitated. As I said before, Ichigo, relax. Lay around, do nothing. Give yourself some time, don't be in such a hurry. Just think about what you want to do, and most importantly, mourn for your loved ones. She said all that with a soft smile. A smile that helped him relax. Thanks, Yasaka. Ichigo said sincerely. This is it for today. Goodbye everyone.